It began with the storm, a roaring, unrelenting tempest that swept through the Appalachian Hills one August evening in 1927. Trees bowed in reverence to the wind's fury, lightning tore across the sky like angry veins, and rain lashed against rooftops with an almost accusatory force. In the town of Barrows Hollow, where news traveled slower than secrets but faster than trains, the Fenner house stood high on Wren Hill like a stubborn relic refusing to fall. After the storm passed, silence blanketed the land. It was the kind of silence that felt earned, like the breath after a scream. That's when Eloise Fenner, rising from a sleepless night, noticed something strange in the attic. A floorboard, warped from the night's downpour, had lifted. Beneath it, wrapped in cloth darkened by time and damp, was a wooden box she didn't recognize. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each carefully folded, tied with twine or ribbon. The ink was faded in places, the paper yellowed and delicate. But what struck her wasn't their age, it was the names on the envelopes. Every single one was addressed to either her or her sister, Vivian. Eloise sat there, her heart racing, fingers trembling as she untied the first ribbon. She recognized the handwriting. It was hers. But she had no memory of writing this letter. The words inside were gentle, poetic, almost confessional. They spoke of longing, of dreams, of fears, whispered only in the quietest moments of solitude. But what frightened her most was that it referred to things that hadn't happened yet. It mentioned a storm, a broken floorboard, and a box of letters. Downstairs, Vivian hummed to herself in the kitchen, unaware of what her sister had found. The younger Fenner was light where Eloise was shadow, vivacious, dreamy, often lost in thought. Their parents had died young, and since then, the sisters had kept to themselves, stitching clothes for the town, tending to the garden, and never straying far from Wren Hill. As Eloise descended the creaky stairs, letter clutched in hand, her thoughts spun like the storm outside had hours earlier. How could she have written something she didn't remember? And if she didn't, who did? At breakfast, she placed the letter beside Vivian's teacup. Vivian glanced down, blinked, and then smiled. "Oh," she said softly, "I wondered where that one had gone." Eloise's breath caught. "You wrote this?" Vivian tilted her head. "No, but I remember reading it." "You read it. But it's addressed to me. And it's in my handwriting." Vivian simply shrugged and sipped her tea. Outside, the townsfolk began to emerge, surveying the storm's aftermath. But inside the Fenner house, a deeper storm was forming, quieter, more insidious, and rooted not in wind or rain, but in memory and ink. Later that day, Eloise sat alone in the attic, the box before her like a question with too many answers. She picked up another letter. This one was addressed to Vivian, but again bore Eloise's handwriting. Inside, a short note. "If you find this after the storm, don't be afraid. It's already begun. E." The light in the attic flickered. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock struck noon. Eloise realized then that these letters weren't just old correspondence, they were something else entirely. Messages from a time that had yet to arrive, warnings, confessions, prophecies. The box held a story not yet told, and Eloise had just turned the first page. It started one quiet morning with the distant call of a mourning dove and the scent of lilacs drifting in from the garden. Vivian was already outside, seated beneath the blooming wisteria, scribbling into a notebook she carried almost everywhere. Eloise watched from the parlor window, her fingers idle on the lace she was stitching. The box in the attic hadn't left her thoughts for a second. When Vivian came in for tea, she tucked the notebook under her arm, humming something tuneless. Eloise wanted to ask about it, about the letters, about everything, but the words clung to her throat like dust. She had spent her life swallowing the unspoken, while Vivian had always seemed to speak in riddles and poetry. That afternoon, Eloise climbed back into the attic. The light filtering through the small window was warm, but the air felt still, too still. She opened the box again. Her fingers hovered over the stack of letters. She had counted them before, 37 in total. Today there were 38. She blinked. The newest envelope lay on top, its edges crisp and white. It was addressed to Eloise, in that same careful, familiar script. But she was certain it hadn't been there the day before. With measured breath, she unfolded the letter. "I remember the smell of lilacs this morning," it began. "Vivian looked peaceful under the wisteria. You watched from the window. Your stitching was untouched." Eloise's heart began to pound. "The box is open again," it continued. "You're reading this now, wondering how it got here. I can't explain it yet, but please, don't tell Vivian, not yet. No signature, just space." She dropped the letter like it had burned her fingertips. When Vivian came up later with a tray of peach slices, Eloise couldn't look her in the eye. "Are you feeling all right?" Vivian asked, her voice soft. "I'm just tired." "You should sleep. Dreams tell you what the day's too loud to say." Vivian lingered for a moment, then placed the tray down and left. Eloise stared at the doorway long after she was gone. That night, after Vivian had gone to bed, Eloise crept into her sister's room. The notebook was on the nightstand. She hesitated only a second before opening it. Most of the pages were filled with sketches, flowers, birds, shapes she didn't recognize. But near the end she found something else, a copy of a letter. Not the one she had read, but another one, dated a week prior. "To whoever finds this, I write only because I don't know how else to breathe. Something is wrong. The words don't belong to me. They come at night, when I'm not awake, but I find them written anyway." It was signed with a V. The next morning, Eloise tried to act as if nothing had changed, but inside a storm gathered. Vivian picked lilacs and arranged them in a glass jar on the table. She smiled. "I had a dream last night," she said. "You and I were standing in the middle of town, and everyone was gone. All the doors were open, and the wind was full of paper." Eloise's teacup shook slightly in her hand. "Sounds like a strange dream." Vivian nodded. "But not frightening. Just quiet." That day another letter appeared. Again it was new, again addressed to Eloise. This time it simply read, "Don't look for answers in Vivian. Look in the places where the wind doesn't reach." She didn't understand what it meant, but she did understand this. The letters weren't just appearing, they were responding, and they were only just beginning. Barrows Hollow wasn't a place where much happened. A child falling from a fence could become the talk of a week, and a new pie recipe at the church social might stir debates for months. So when the Fenner sisters began making more frequent appearances at the post office, Vivian dropping off sealed envelopes, Eloise quietly retrieving others, people noticed. Lorraine Pickett, the town's postmaster for nearly 30 years, prided herself on discretion. But she also prided herself on patterns, and lately, the Fenner girls' habits didn't make sense. Letters should go somewhere. These didn't. Each was addressed either to Miss Eloise Fenner or Miss Vivian Fenner, with no return address, no postage mark, and no record of sending. She mentioned it once lightly to Reverend Abel Whitmore, over tea in the church kitchen. "They're sending letters to each other," she said, stirring her cup slowly, "but none of them leave the building." "Maybe they're just passing notes," he replied. But there was a pause in his voice, a hesitation she didn't miss. "No one passes notes sealed in wax with no stamp." Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "So you think something's wrong?" "I think something's odd." He didn't answer, but the next Sunday his sermon was on secrets and the eyes that watch even when you think you're alone. From his pulpit, Reverend Whitmore could see the whole congregation. He noticed Vivian that morning, her hands in her lap, head tilted slightly, eyes closed, like she was listening to a different voice entirely. And Eloise, rigid as stone beside her, her jaw tight, gaze fixed forward. Afterward, outside the church, folks gathered in clusters like they always did. But the Fenner sisters walked alone, nodding politely but never stopping. A few whispered as they passed. "They say the younger one talks to herself. Heard she leaves letters in trees. I saw them digging in their yard by lantern light last Tuesday." None of it was confirmed, but in Barrows Hollow, confirmation wasn't necessary, only repetition. Reverend Whitmore paid a visit to Lorraine the following day. "Have they sent anything new?" She nodded. "Vivian dropped one off this morning, same style. Handwritten, no address beyond their own name." He asked to see it, and though she hesitated, breaking postal confidence wasn't something she took lightly. Her curiosity overruled her caution. She handed him the envelope. It was sealed in deep violet wax, stamped with a crescent moon. Inside, the letter was brief. "I'm beginning to hear them again. Not voices, not exactly. It's more like echoes that never happened. The letters know before I do. They show me things. Sometimes they lie, sometimes they don't. But I keep writing. It feels worse when I stop." No name, no date. Just that. The Reverend returned the letter silently. Lorraine watched him. "What do you think it means?" He shook his head. "I think it means something is waking." The next morning, a boy named Samuel Huxley, who delivered milk in the early hours, told his mother he'd seen Vivian sitting under the church bell tower at dawn, barefoot and writing on the back of hymn sheets. When his mother asked what she'd said, the boy shrugged. She said she was sending a letter to the future. News of this made its way to Lorraine, then to the Reverend. Soon it was on every tongue. The Fenner sisters, it seemed, were becoming the town's secret spectacle. But for Eloise, the world outside had narrowed. She no longer trusted the sunlight. The letters were multiplying, some arriving beneath her pillow, others tucked between the pages of books she hadn't opened in years. Each bore her name. Each told her things she couldn't explain. She found one that evening that simply said, "They're starting to watch you. Don't trust the ones who smile too easily." She looked up toward the window. Outside on the road, someone was standing, watching. The figure by the window was gone by morning, leaving no footprints, no trace, just a lingering discomfort Eloise couldn't shake. She barely slept. At dawn, she climbed into the attic again. The box of letters sat there, untouched, but different somehow, like it had been stirred while no one was looking. She opened it. 42 letters now. She picked one at random. This time the handwriting wasn't hers. The ink was thicker, darker, and the loops of the script were more frantic. It was addressed to Vivian, but the contents made her blood chill. "They know you read these. They know you remember. But they don't know I remember too. There are gaps. Places in the timeline no one touches. That's where I hide. That's where I write. No signature. No explanation." She placed it aside and picked another. This one referenced events that hadn't happened yet. "There will be a break. Something in the glass. It will start with your hands. Don't try to stop it." Eloise dropped the letter. Downstairs, the sound of glass shattering rang through the house. She raced down, heart pounding. Vivian stood in the parlor, barefoot, staring at her bleeding palm. A vase had fallen, shards glittering like teeth on the rug. "I don't know how it slipped," Vivian whispered, blinking slowly. Eloise rushed to her side, wrapping her sister's hand in a towel. Neither of them spoke of the letter. That night, as the wind curled against the windows and the house moaned with age, Eloise couldn't stop shaking. She took the burned-out candle stub and went searching. Her steps led her not to the attic, but to the parlor bookshelf. One volume, Appalachian Folklore and Spirit Testimonies, caught her eye. A book they never read, a gift from a neighbor long gone. Inside it, pressed between 2 chapters, she found another letter. This one had no envelope, no greeting. It was written as if the reader already knew too much. "They will question what is real. They will question what is memory. But the truth is not in what was, it's in what could be. The pages are only paper. What matters is the ink. You've always known this." Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned quickly, but no one was there. Eloise tucked the letter into her apron and returned to her room, only to find Vivian sitting cross-legged on her bed, staring at the wall. "I remembered something," Vivian said softly. "From when we were children." Eloise froze. "What did you remember?" "We had a dollhouse. You used to hide notes inside it, little stories you made up, letters to no one. That was years ago." Vivian nodded. "But I didn't read them back then. I only found them after you stopped writing them. And even then, they felt familiar." Eloise sat beside her. "You think this started back then?" "I don't think it ever started. I think it's always been." The silence between them stretched, then folded into something shared. The next morning, Eloise tried to test the letters. She wrote one. in her own hand, using her own ink. She placed it in the box, addressed to herself, dated 3 days forward. Then she waited. For 3 days, the letter didn't move. The ink stayed wet, the words unchanged. Then, on the 4th day, she opened the box. The letter she had written was gone, but a new one sat in its place. Same envelope, same date. Inside, her own words stared back at her, but they had changed. The last line now read, "Don't try to change the story, it already knows the ending." She stared at it for a long time. And then, in the dim light of the attic, she did something she hadn't done since childhood. She burned it. The fire flared, then died. And for a moment, she thought the house sighed. The envelope was damp when Eloise found it, pressed against the glass of the front window, like it had been left by unseen hands in the night. The wax seal was cracked, the parchment frayed at the edges, and inside the message was brief. "Do not ignore the next letter. It will not be meant for you, but you must read it." Eloise looked around the empty parlor, heart thrumming. She wasn't alone. She just couldn't prove it. Before we continue, if you've been drawn into this mystery, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this one, unfolding, unsettling, unforgettable, are waiting here for you. Don't miss what's coming next. The next letter arrived later that day, slipped between the pages of an old hymnal. Eloise wasn't the one who found it. Vivian was. She came into the kitchen holding the letter as if it was something holy. "It has your name on it," she said. Eloise froze. "It's for me?" "No. It's from you." Vivian handed it over and left the room. Eloise opened the letter. "Vivian," it read, "I don't know when you'll read this, but please believe me. I am trying to protect you. I am trying to remember. The things that speak in our dreams, they were never just dreams, they are instructions." She stopped. Her own handwriting stared back at her, clear and decisive. "But there is a price for remembering. I forget who I am each time I learn something new. If this reaches you, it means I've broken the cycle, or maybe started it again." The bottom of the letter was stained, mud, maybe, or dried blood. She couldn't tell. Vivian never asked what it said, but she began sleeping with the lights on. That evening, Reverend Whitmore walked the path from the church to Wren Hill. He wasn't invited, but he came anyway. Eloise met him at the door. "You've been receiving letters," he said simply. She didn't answer. "They're not just yours, are they?" Still silence. He handed her something, a torn corner of parchment. It had no greeting, no farewell, only a phrase. "They told me to give this to you. I don't know who they are." Eloise unfolded it and read the words aloud. "The night will speak, don't interrupt it." When she looked up, Whitmore had already turned to leave. Later, alone, she climbed to the attic and opened the box again. It was full. She didn't remember adding to it. The letters were no longer stacked. They were chaotic, layered, pressed against each other, like they'd grown from the box itself. She reached in and pulled out one at random. This time, the handwriting wasn't hers or Vivian's. It was unfamiliar, jagged, thin, erratic. "You're not the only one who writes. We all do in the spaces between breath and silence. You just forgot how to listen." She dropped it back inside. Then she noticed something new, a letter addressed not to her or to Vivian, but to the house on Wren Hill. It felt heavier in her hands, older. She didn't open it. Not yet. That night, thunder rolled again across the mountains. No storm followed, but the air felt charged. In her sleep, Vivian murmured names they didn't know. Eloise sat beside her, holding her sister's wrist gently, counting the pulses. And in the hallway near the bookshelf, a letter waited on the floor. No name, no stamp, just one sentence. "You've already opened what you should have left closed." Eloise didn't touch it, but the message stayed with her. Because she knew something now, something terrifying and impossible. Some of the letters and weren't just messages, some were watching. Vivian was speaking to someone again. Eloise heard her through the thin walls, whispering in the early hours, her voice gentle but tense, like the hush one uses with a frightened animal. She pressed her ear to the door, trying to make out the words, but they were slippery, fragments only. "No, I didn't forget. You were supposed to stay hidden. It's not my fault she burned it." When Eloise entered, the room was empty save for Vivian, seated at the foot of her bed, hands clasped tight. Her eyes were rimmed red, but she smiled faintly. "Morning. Who are you talking to?" "No one." "Vivian." She looked away. "I don't always know when I'm awake." Eloise didn't press her further. Instead, she helped her sister downstairs for tea. But something in Vivian's gaze had shifted, like she was watching the world from behind glass. Later that day, Eloise returned to the attic, not for the letters this time, but for the tools. A hammer, a crowbar. She had grown tired of only receiving. She wanted to uncover. She remembered an odd draft coming from the north wall behind the cabinet. With effort, she dragged it aside and tapped on the boards. Hollow. She pulled at the edges until one plank gave. Behind it, darkness. Reaching in, she felt rough wood and then something smooth, cool to the touch. A mirror. It was small, rectangular, old, not dusty, clean as if waiting. She brought it into the light and held it up. At first, nothing seemed strange, but then she noticed the delay. Her reflection blinked a fraction too late, and when she turned her head slightly to the left, the image hesitated and smiled. Eloise dropped the mirror. It didn't shatter. Instead, the glass cracked right down the middle, a jagged line like lightning frozen in time. She backed away slowly, heart racing. And then, from behind her, a rustle. A letter had fallen from the space behind the wall. It was folded into a square, sealed not with wax but thread. She opened it. "The mirror holds one version of you, it's not the right one. Don't let her speak." Below that, scrawled hurriedly as if added after, "She already has." Eloise clutched the paper and fled the attic. She found Vivian outside in the garden, barefoot in the damp grass, her eyes fixed on the tree line. She was holding something, another letter open. "Where did you get that?" Eloise asked. "It was in my shoe." "Vivian, listen to me." "The mirror in the attic." Vivian didn't look away from the trees. "She's coming, the one in the mirror. She's trying to remember, too." "Who is she?" Vivian finally turned to her, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "She said her name is Eloise." That night, Eloise locked the attic door for the first time in years. She placed the cracked mirror inside a box, wrapped it in cloth and pushed it into the back of the wardrobe. But when she checked the wardrobe again before bed, the mirror was gone. Instead, she found another letter, written in a different shade of ink, one she hadn't seen before, deep red, almost brown. "You cracked the mirror, but not the reflection. She's still watching. And now she knows where you sleep." She read the words twice, and then, folded inside, she found a small scrap of glass. It had her handwriting on it, but she had never written on glass. She placed it down carefully, closed the wardrobe, and turned toward the door. Behind her, from inside the room, she thought she heard someone whisper her name, not once, twice, and neither voice was hers. The fog rolled in heavy that morning, thick as wool and bitter on the tongue. It swallowed the hill, muffled the world, and left only shapes in the grey. From the front porch, Eloise could barely see past the garden. The trees, usually distant and firm, now pressed close like watchers cloaked in smoke. Vivian said nothing during breakfast. Her fingers traced the rim of her teacup over and over. She hadn't spoken since the mirror. When the first knock came, it was faint, more like a tap, a suggestion. Eloise opened the door. No one, only fog. But on the mat lay a letter, folded, no envelope, bound with string. It read, "They're not strangers. They've always been here. The fog only makes them visible." She stepped back, pulse quickening. An hour later, another knock. This time Vivian opened it. Eloise heard her gasp, followed by silence. She rushed to the door, but Vivian was standing alone on the porch. "He was just there," she said, eyes wide. "He was standing right there." "Who?" Vivian's voice dropped. Our father. Eloise felt cold spread through her spine. Vivian, he's gone, he's been gone. I know, but it was him. He was looking at me like he remembered something, like he wanted me to remember it too. Eloise took her inside and locked the door. Later that afternoon, more visitors came, not by knock or voice, but glimpses through windows, shadows behind curtains. A man in a black coat standing in the orchard. A child with no shoes sitting near the well. A woman in a yellow dress brushing her hair beside the fence. None of them moved, none of them belonged. Eloise checked every window. Each time a new silhouette waited, distant and still. By sunset, the fog had thickened, refusing to lift. And then the mail arrived. Not in the box, but inside the house. Letters, dozens of them, scattered on the parlor floor like leaves blown in by wind. Eloise stood frozen. Vivian knelt and picked one up. This one's from me, she whispered. You didn't write it, Eloise said. Vivian shook her head. No, but I remember writing it, or dreaming it. The letter said, don't open the door at night. Don't invite them in, even if they know your name, especially if they know your name. There was a knock on the back door. Neither sister moved. A few moments passed. Then came another knock, this time softer, lower, like fingers dragging down wood. Eloise approached slowly, heart hammering. She didn't open it. She whispered, Who's there? A voice responded, muffled, hoarse. Eloise, let me in. I have your letter. She stepped back. Who are you? You wrote to me first. She turned the bolt without opening the door. Leave it outside, she said. No reply. When she opened the door 10 minutes later, there was nothing on the step, but stuck beneath the doorframe was a note, small and creased. It said, We don't need to be invited anymore. She burned it in the fireplace. That night, Eloise and Vivian sat in silence, watching the fog breathe against the windows. I think they're part of the letters, Vivian whispered. Maybe they always were. They're not letters anymore, Eloise said. They're answers to questions we never meant to ask. Vivian looked toward the hallway. Then we need to stop asking. But neither of them stood. Neither of them moved. Because just then, from the far end of the house came a soft creak, the unmistakable sound of the attic door unlocking itself. It was Reverend Whitmore who first noticed Lorraine Pickett was missing. He had stopped by the post office mid-morning, a habit ingrained after years of ritual. Tea, brief conversation, a short walk back to the church. But the door was locked, the blinds drawn. No sign of her. He returned that afternoon, still locked. By dusk, the whispers had already begun. She hadn't been seen since the day before when she mentioned receiving something strange, something she didn't want to discuss. A letter, she'd said, one she shouldn't have opened. They found her purse inside the office. Her coat still hung behind the desk. The kettle on the back burner had boiled dry, but there was no sign of Lorraine herself. Eloise and Vivian learned of it through the baker's boy, who had overheard his mother repeating the news. She just vanished, he'd said, left everything but herself behind. That night, Vivian stood by the front window, unmoving. She read something, she murmured. She read one of the wrong ones. Eloise didn't ask how she knew. She already believed it. The fog had lifted, but the house felt colder. The attic remained locked, though neither sister had dared return to it. Still, at odd hours, they heard things from above, rustling paper, the sound of pages turning slowly, methodically. Then the letter came. This one was left on the church pulpit. It bore no name, but it was addressed to those who gather. Inside only one sentence. She listened too loud. The next morning, Eloise found Vivian in the garden, kneeling in the dirt beside the lilacs. She was digging with her bare hands. What are you doing? Eloise asked. Vivian looked up. Her fingers were caked in soil, her nails dark. There's something buried here. I think she left something. Who? Vivian didn't answer. Eloise helped her dig. After several inches, her hands struck wood, a small box wrapped in cloth. Inside, folded neatly, was a single envelope. It bore the church's seal and Lorraine's handwriting. Vivian opened it. The letter was short, a confession more than a message. I read aloud one of theirs. I don't know what I expected. A curse? A vision? What I got was silence, but not peace. The kind of silence that listens back. I feel it everywhere now. I think they're choosing. I don't think I was supposed to speak it. Vivian read it twice, then burned it. Eloise said nothing. That Sunday, Reverend Whitmore stepped to the pulpit. His hands trembled as he unfolded his sermon, but he didn't speak from it. Instead, he addressed the room directly. There are things we pass by without knowing, stories we step over because they don't make sense. But I think we've stepped too far this time. Murmurs filled the chapel. He continued. Lorraine didn't run away. Something was taken, something old, something watching. And it's not done. Later, a woman from the back row whispered to Eloise, I heard Lorraine shouting scripture the day before she vanished, in the street, like she was trying to drown out something else. Vivian stopped walking. Do you remember what verse? The woman frowned. Isaiah, the one about a voice crying in the wilderness. That night, another letter arrived. Not addressed to either sister. It simply said, the next one to speak it aloud will vanish with no sound. They left it on the windowsill. Vivian didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Eloise watched her carefully, because she had a suspicion, unspoken but solid, that the letters weren't just predicting, they were selecting, and Lorraine Pickett had been the first. The house had begun to hum. It was low at first, barely perceptible, a vibration more than a sound. But Eloise felt it in her bones, a tremor that lived in the wood, the walls, the space between breaths. She knew it wasn't imagined. The letters had grown colder too, literally. Their paper now chilled her fingers as she touched them, and the ink had turned from black to a faint silver, hard to read unless angled just right in the light. One night, unable to sleep, she found Vivian sitting in the kitchen, wrapped in a quilt, eyes wide and dry. I've remembered something, Vivian said. Eloise sat across from her. What? When I was 13, I started writing letters to myself. I didn't think anything of it. They helped calm me. But then I started finding ones I hadn't written. They were still in my handwriting, but I didn't recognize them. I thought I was going mad. Why didn't you tell me? Vivian smiled sadly. Because I thought you'd stop me. Eloise reached across the table, took her sister's hand. What do they say? They change. At first they were comforting, then they started predicting things, small things, what someone would wear, a storm, the name of a visitor. And then they began mentioning people who weren't real. People who became real later. Vivian stood, went to the pantry, pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were letters, old, some weathered, some torn, all folded carefully. These came before the others, she said, before the attic ones, before yours. Eloise sorted through them, heart pounding. They were dated, and each date corresponded to moments they both remembered, moments of silence, of confusion, of dreams neither could fully explain. One caught her attention immediately. It was addressed to Vivian Fenner, age 9. Inside, you will see her again. But not when you want to, and not as herself. Who does this refer to? Eloise asked. Vivian hesitated. Mother. Eloise froze. I saw her once, years after she died. She stood by the old oak, smiling. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. I thought I dreamed it, but the letter came the day before, told me to look near the tree. She sat again. I think the letters aren't about us. I think we're conduits. Conduits for what? For something older than words, something that's been waiting to be remembered. Eloise shook her head. This is too much. None of it makes sense. Vivian met her eyes. Then why do you feel like you already knew? The question landed heavy. Later alone, Eloise went to the attic. She didn't bring a candle this time. She didn't need light to find what she was looking for. In the far corner behind the stack of fabric bolts, she found the panel in the wall. It opened without effort now. Behind it, more letters. One was addressed to the one who will break it. Inside, you've begun to see it, the shape beneath the story. The truth is not in the letters. The truth is in the act of writing them. That's how it spreads. Eloise took the letter down to Vivian. Do you know what this means? She asked. Vivian nodded slowly. It means it uses us. The writing. It's a kind of invocation, a mirror with no reflection. Then we stop writing. Vivian looked pained. I already tried. What happened? Vivian didn't speak. She only opened her palm. Inside was a new letter, folded so small it had cut the skin beneath her fingernails. Eloise unfolded it carefully. You cannot silence a thing by ignoring it, only by understanding its name. There was no signature, but in the corner, barely visible, was a symbol, something sharp, looping, ancient. They had never seen it before, but both sisters recognized it instantly. And both whispered the same thing at once. I've drawn that before. The attic floor creaked under Eloise's steps, but it wasn't the sound that troubled her. It was the texture. Something beneath her feet felt soft, like the wood had begun to rot from inside. She knelt, pressed her palm to the floorboards and sensed a hollowness, as if the house itself was exhaling. Vivian joined her minutes later, holding a lantern and a spade. There's something under here, Eloise said. I'm sure of it. They cleared the boxes, lifted the rug, and pried up the warped planks. Dust swirled, thick and grey. Beneath the boards lay dirt, dark, compact, untouched. They dug with bare hands and metal until the blade struck something solid. Wood, not the beams of the house. Second floor. They exposed a lid, a trunk, large, iron-banded, locked with no keyhole. But the moment Eloise touched it, the latch opened on its own. The air grew colder. Inside, letters. Hundreds of them, some folded, some rolled, some torn and burned. The paper was aged unevenly, some crisp and new, others so fragile they flaked at the edges. Most were sealed. A few were stained dark, copper-colored, dried long ago. And one detail made Eloise's skin crawl. Every single letter had the name of someone in town, written in their own handwriting. I know that one, Vivian said, pointing. That's Mrs. Callahan. But she died last year. Vivian nodded. I saw her write that name when she had the fever. She thought she was writing to her son. But that letter, it never got mailed. They pulled more from the chest. Names they knew, names they had buried, people who'd vanished, lost their minds, spoken in tongues before the end, and dates. Each letter bore a date. Some were from the past, some from the future. Eloise opened one addressed to Reverend Whitmore. The ink was fresh. The words read, You've asked the wrong questions. You will receive the right answers, just not in time. She folded it back quickly. Vivian, what is this? Her sister didn't answer. She was staring at a bundle of letters tied in red string. One by one she untied them. They were all addressed to her, and none of them were in her handwriting. Vivian began to shake. These are from me, but not me. They mention things I never told anyone. A poem I wrote and buried, the creek we swam in as children, the scar behind my ear. Could someone have found your journals? Vivian looked up slowly. There were no journals. They went through the letters until one caught Eloise's eye. It had no name, no address, only a single phrase scrawled in the center of the page. The story ends where it begins. But not for everyone. Underneath, drawn faintly, was the symbol again, the one both sisters had remembered, the looping, sharp spiral like a signature burned into memory. Eloise turned to the bottom of the trunk. There, wrapped in cloth, lay a large envelope, sealed in black wax. She broke it open. Inside were multiple pages, stacked, numbered, written in a careful hand. It was a story. And its title was The Untold Story of the Fenner Sisters. Vivian took the first page and read aloud. There were once two sisters who never stopped writing, not because they had something to say, but because something else was listening. She stopped. Eloise took the second page. And with every word it grew stronger. With every letter sent it grew closer. Until one day the words they wrote began to write them. They looked at each other, then together turned the last page. It was blank, but only for a moment. As they watched, ink began to bloom across the surface, slow, deliberate, alive. It was writing itself. The paper did not stop writing. As Eloise and Vivian watched, the ink continued forming words in deliberate strokes, as though the page itself were breathing. Each sentence seemed to echo what they were thinking, not what they said aloud, but what pulsed silently between them. The attic had gone quiet, but it was a silence laced with pressure, like the pause before a scream. Vivian stepped back. "We shouldn't have read it." Eloise shook her head. "It would have found us anyway." That night the sisters didn't sleep. They took turns watching the pages, afraid to let them write unwitnessed. But by morning the ink had dried, and the final sentence had appeared. "When you realize the letters never needed you, the fire begins." The first spark came hours later. Not in the attic, but in the walls. It was the scent that warned them, sharp, oily, wrong. Eloise raced through the hallway, following the heat to the parlor. A thin line of flame curled upward from the baseboard, licking the wallpaper. She grabbed a blanket, smothered it. Vivian stood behind her, frozen. "We didn't light it." "I know." They checked the kitchen, the cellar, the bedrooms. Nothing. No source, no kindling. But then they opened the wardrobe. The mirror was back, cracked, yes, but whole again, resting where it had been before Eloise hid it. And now, something moved behind the reflection. Not a face, a shape, coiled, watching. Eloise slammed the doors shut. Vivian whispered, "We can't stop it. We've opened too much." "We burned the letters." "All of them?" "Yes." It took them an hour to gather them. Everyone from the attic, the pantry, the hidden spaces. They stacked them in the fireplace, doused them in oil, and set the match. The flames roared. The ink sizzled. But it didn't smell like burning paper. It smelled like earth, like moss and stone, like something old, unburied. From within the flames, Eloise thought she saw symbols dancing, shapes from dreams she hadn't had yet. When it was done, only ash remained, but the silence didn't return. Instead, a knock. At the front door. Neither of them moved. Then a second knock, gentle, polite. Eloise opened it. A woman stood there, pale dress, bare feet, hair the color of dusk. She said nothing, just held out an envelope. It was sealed with no wax, no stamp, addressed to the one who thinks she knows. Eloise didn't take it. Vivian did. The woman turned and walked back into the trees, vanishing between the branches like smoke. They opened the letter together. "You cannot destroy what remembers itself. You cannot silence a voice that writes in blood and time. But you can ask it the right question." "What question?" Vivian whispered. Eloise looked down. At the bottom of the letter, in faint print, "Ask it who wrote the first letter." And with that, the fire rekindled. This time from inside the walls. Flames burst through the attic floor, swallowing the beams with a hunger that hissed. Vivian grabbed the wooden trunk. They couldn't leave it. Eloise clutched the final half-written page from the story. Together they fled the house. Outside, the smoke curled into the morning sky. The house on Wren Hill burned until nothing remained. No townsfolk came, no sirens, only the sisters standing in the ash. Vivian coughed, turned to Eloise. "What if it follows us?" Eloise looked down at the page she had saved. New words were forming. "Just 3. It already has." The ashes of Wren Hill smoldered for 3 days. No one came to ask what had happened. No questions, no search. It was as if the house had never stood, as if it had simply chosen to stop existing. Eloise and Vivian stayed at the church for one night. Reverend Whitmore's invitation, quiet and wordless. He never asked what they carried, nor why they refused to leave the small trunk beside the bed. But on the second morning, a plain envelope appeared. It had no address, no name, no seal. Whitmore found it on the altar, resting on his Bible. Inside was one word, Malachi. He stared at it for a long time before folding the letter into his coat pocket. Later that day, he knocked on the sisters' door. "I need to show you something," he said. They followed him to the old records room beneath the chapel. Dust hung thick in the air, and old church books lined the walls, baptisms, marriages, deaths. He pulled a thin journal from the bottom shelf, bound in leather older than anything else in the room. "My real name isn't Abel," he said quietly. Vivian frowned. "What is it?" "Malachi." Eloise froze. "The letter," he nodded. "This was my father's book, passed down. He warned me years ago about certain names, symbols, stories that repeat. When your letters started appearing, I knew. I didn't want to believe it." He opened the journal. Drawings filled the margins, loops and spirals, eyes without pupils, hands writing into mirrors. One page showed a house, small atop a hill with smoke curling from its roof. Underneath, "It burns when they remember." "That's Wren Hill," Eloise whispered. Whitmore turned the page. There, in uneven lines, "The one who writes becomes the one who is written." "You cannot hold a pen and remain yourself." Vivian closed the book. "There's more," she said. "We saw a symbol in the letters. Something ancient, something we knew without knowing why." Whitmore retrieved a folded cloth from his satchel, unwrapped it. The same symbol, burned into fabric. "I dreamt this before I found it," he said. "Same as you, I'd bet." Eloise nodded. "What does it mean?" she asked. Whitmore's eyes didn't blink. "It's not a symbol. It's a question. A map, folded into one shape. It asks something we're not supposed to answer." They returned to the chapel, silent. That night, Vivian didn't speak. She only handed Eloise a letter. It hadn't been written yet. A blank sheet, but at the bottom, faintly visible in the candlelight, words began to rise, like ink from beneath the surface. "This is the letter you never wrote." And then, line by line, a message appeared. "I would have told you sooner, but the words weren't mine. They borrowed my hands, my voice. They let me remember just enough, but not all at once." Eloise watched the message unfold. "I'm sorry." Then, "You will need to decide who writes the ending." She looked up. Vivian was crying. "Was it me?" Eloise asked. "I don't know anymore." The next morning the letter was gone, but in its place, folded neatly on the nightstand, lay a page from the old story they'd found, one they hadn't read yet. It bore a new title, "To the One Who Still Thinks This Is Just a Story." Eloise didn't read it. She folded it carefully, placed it in her coat and walked outside, where the sky hung low and colorless. She stood by the ruins of Wren Hill, now cold and silent. Something inside her shifted. Not broke, just changed shape. Because she understood now. There are letters that are written. There are letters that write you. And there is one you never mean to write, because once it's on the page remembers, and it never forgets. Vivian disappeared on a Tuesday. She left no note, no sign of struggle, just a single letter on the pillow, sealed in black thread. Eloise didn't open it. She couldn't. The silence left behind was thicker than grief. It was expectation. 3 weeks passed. The house that had once burned was nothing but memory and char. Reverend Whitmore remained distant, quiet, as if something about Vivian's absence had reopened a door he'd fought to keep shut. He said little, prayed often. Eloise wandered between places. She returned often to the edge of the woods, to the church steps, to the field behind what had once been Wren Hill. But she found no footprints, no scent on the wind, nothing. Until the morning Vivian came back. She was standing in the orchard behind the schoolhouse, her dress torn, her hair uncombed, her eyes wide but calm. Eloise ran to her, heart in her throat. Vivian didn't speak, not at first. She reached into her coat and pulled out a letter, wax-sealed in grey, the seal shaped like an open eye. Eloise took it slowly. Vivian said, "This one ends it, or begins something else." She looked thinner but not broken, not lost, changed. The letter was addressed to whoever is ready to know. Inside, the message was brief. The story isn't the paper, it's not even the words. It's what lives between them. You've walked the margins, now you have to decide whether to cross the line. Eloise asked, "Where did you go?" Vivian blinked. "I followed the letters." "They led you somewhere?" "No," she said. "They led me through something." She sat on the ground, breathing slowly. "I walked through memory, but not mine. I saw what the house remembered, what the ground remembered. I saw our mother's face, not as I remembered it, but as the earth did." Eloise felt cold ripple across her skin. "And I saw a door," Vivian whispered. "It opened the wrong way, not in or out, just around." She looked up. There were more letters, ones never written, ones that write themselves only when read. Eloise asked, "Did you read them?" Vivian hesitated. "No, I listened." "And what did they say?" "That the story is hungry." She reached into her coat again and pulled out a second letter, this one sealed in white wax with no symbol. "This one is for you," she said. Eloise broke the seal. Inside, a single question. "Do you still believe you're the one writing this?" She looked at her sister. Vivian smiled faintly. "You've always been the pen," she said, "not the hand." That night they returned to the church. They sat in the empty pews, the candlelight trembling across the walls. Vivian opened the trunk one final time. Inside, the last bundle of unread pages, but this time no words formed, just paper, just space, until Eloise placed her hand on them. Then ink spread across the page, like veins through frost. Vivian watched, tears in her eyes. "You're the ending," she whispered. Eloise whispered back, "Or the beginning." Outside, the wind changed. Inside, the story continued, no longer asking permission. The first word appeared in the center of the page. Once, not in Eloise's handwriting, not in anyone's they recognized. It looked as though the ink had risen from the fibers, summoned rather than written. Vivian watched in silence as more words followed, forming not a letter, but a narrative. A long time ago, before this town had a name, before the hills were carved by footsteps, the letters came. Not written, not spoken, just present, a knowing that seeded itself into those who listened too closely. Eloise's breath hitched. The words weren't forming randomly. They were telling. They chose two sisters, not the first, not the last. But these would remember, these would try to resist. Vivian turned to her. "They're writing us." Eloise nodded. "Or we're writing them." The story expanded, curling across multiple pages without pause. The paper consumed ink endlessly, but nothing ever bled through. Each line more precise, more intentional. The first sister spoke only when silence failed. The second spoke often, even when no one asked. Between them a bond formed stronger than blood, remembrance. One remembered through forgetting. The other forgot through remembering. Vivian's voice cracked as she read aloud. "This is not prophecy, this is memory." They reached the final page. There, in bold script, "You were never the authors, you were the continuation." Underneath, a single line, handwritten, clearly Vivian's own hand. "I don't remember writing this," she whispered. The line read, "To break the story, tell it to someone who has never been part of it." They stared at each other. No one in town remained untouched. Everyone had heard, everyone had seen. Even the silence had been stained, except Eloise's voice barely escaped her throat. "The child by the creek." Vivian blinked. "What child?" "The one who left flowers. Alone. I saw him once. Maybe 6. Maybe younger. He wasn't from here." They didn't wait until morning. They found him before dawn, curled under the sycamore, humming to himself, stacking stones into towers with no pattern. He looked up at them. "Did you come to tell a story?" he asked. Vivian knelt. "Would you listen if we did?" He nodded. And so, with shaking hands, Eloise unfolded the first page. She didn't read it aloud. She told it, spoke the sentences as memory, not recital, spoke not from ink, but from what lived between the spaces, of the house on Wren Hill, of the box in the attic, of the mirror that cracked but didn't break. She spoke of letters that weren't letters, and names that weren't names, and silence that listened. Vivian spoke next, voice soft but clear, tracing the shape of the tale with her breath. And when they finished, the child said nothing. He stood, walked into the trees, and disappeared. No letter followed, no page turned itself. Nothing happened at all. Until midnight. A wind rose, and the ink began to fade. One by one, the letters lost their words. The box emptied itself, the paper crumbled, not into ash but into soil. When they touched it, the earth felt warm, alive. And Eloise understood. The story wasn't ending, it had been planted, and now something new would grow. Eloise stood on the edge of the old field, a thin morning mist curling around her ankles. Wren Hill was nothing but wild grass and ash now, but in her hands she still carried the last remnant, a single unmarked envelope. Vivian waited at the tree line, quiet and steady, eyes clear as spring water. They had both felt the shift. The story was finished, but its echo remained, a memory not quite erased. The town had moved on. The church bells still rang. Children still raced to the river. But to Eloise, every shadow felt softer, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath. She walked along the old road, tracing the path she'd taken so many times before, when the house was still standing, when the attic still whispered, when she'd believed the letters would never stop. But they had. The final envelope in her hand was heavier than paper ought to be. It had no seal, no address, no trace of handwriting, only possibility. She knelt beneath a willow, pressed the envelope into the earth and covered it with a fistful of warm soil. Vivian joined her, placing her hand gently over Eloise's. "We're done," she said. "For now," Eloise replied. They stood, silent, watching the sunlight catch on dew. Not far away, a young boy wandered near the fence, humming to himself, eyes wide with the gentle wonder of those who haven't yet learned to be afraid. He stopped, knelt in the grass, and began digging with his fingers. Eloise and Vivian exchanged a glance. Neither spoke. The boy pulled something from the ground, a letter unmarked, yellowed by age but strong as new bark. He opened it. His lips moved, reading silently. Then he smiled and tucked the letter into his pocket. A new story had found its listener. Eloise felt the weight lift from her chest. Not relief, not freedom, just a lightness, as if a burden long carried had been given permission to rest. Vivian squeezed her hand. "We'll remember," she whispered. Eloise nodded. "But we won't write." They walked away from the willow, from the story, from everything that had haunted and shaped them, and as they did, the wind rose softly, carrying the scent of lilac and earth. For the first time in years, Eloise did not look back. Behind them, the world felt quiet, but not empty, just waiting. Before you go, if you've been moved by the untold story of the Fenner sisters, remember to subscribe to the channel. Your support is what keeps these stories alive, and there are many more mysteries to be uncovered together. Don't forget to click on the suggested video that's now on your screen to continue this journey into the unknown. There's always another secret waiting, another story ready to be discovered. Thank you for listening. And remember, some letters never reach the end. They just wait for the right person to read them.